Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we explore exciting ideas in a comprehensive way. Today, we're embarking on something quite fascinating, a reevaluation of one of philosophy's, well, titans, Friedrich Nietzsche.
Ah, Nietzsche always sparks a conversation.
Definitely. You know, people often think of the will to power or the Übermensch, but we're looking at him through a very specific, maybe unexpected lens, how he used animals in his work.
Right. His philosophical zoo, as some
Yeah.
people call it.
Exactly. If you've read him, he uses the lion, the camel, the eagle, all these creatures, and not just as, fancy literary devices.
No, they're central metaphors.
Hmm.
Really powerful ones he uses to critique human values, morality, explore ideas about strength, weakness.
And this striving for what he called a higher form of humanity. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is sort of the jumping off point for our deep dive today.
Okay.
There's this recent reevaluation by a scholar, Mercedes Noam Kosticki, and she points to this surprising, maybe even uncomfortable paradox right at the heart of Nietzsche's animal allegories.
A paradox in Nietzsche. Imagine that.
Huh, right. She argues that in his really passionate quest for this higher man, this whole revaluation of values, Nietzsche, maybe without fully realizing it, couldn't quite manage to let the spider be a spider.
Let the spider be a spider. That's evocative. And I think that framing gets at something really important. Because this deep dive, it isn't just about picking apart a historical philosopher, though that's definitely part of it.
Sure.
It's more about exploring how we, all of us, tend to use metaphors, how we project our own stuff, our values, our hopes, our anxieties onto the natural world.
Yeah.
It really makes you ask, when we look at, say, an animal, are we actually seeing it for what it is? Or are we just seeing a mirror, a reflection of what we want or need to believe about ourselves and the world?
Okay, so let's dig into that. Let's start with Kosticki's own kind of snag moment, as she calls it. She talks about reading Nietzsche, really appreciating his, brilliance.
Which is undeniable.
Absolutely. But then something quite small, almost trivial on the surface, just snagged her attention. His specific use of the spider.
The spider, okay.
And it's this detail that she says kind of unravels a much bigger thread running through his whole philosophy. So Nietzsche, he uses the spider, often quite negatively, actually, as this metaphor for the human intellect.
Right. Spinning webs.
Exactly. Spinning these intricate conceptual webs, what he calls metaphysics, these big abstract systems of thought that try to nail down ultimate reality.
Which he saw as traps, essentially. Illusions.
Precisely. He thought we humans mistake these webs we spin for reality itself, and that these metaphysical webs were, well, unhealthy, life-denying even.
So his idea was,
His idea was that maybe we, spiders, as he put it, could learn to spin different webs, life-affirming, healthier, non-metaphysical cobwebs. He wanted a new way of thinking, a philosophy that didn't trap us.
okay, and that sounds, well, very Nietzschean. But this is where Kosticki steps in with her critique.
This is exactly it.
And it's a really sharp point. She basically says, hold on, a real spider,
Yeah.
it doesn't spin its web because it's wrestling with metaphysics or feeling unhealthy.
Right.
It spins its web to live, to catch flies, to, survive. Its web spinning is just, it's a pure expression of its nature. It doesn't sting because it resents things or spin because of some deep-seated trauma.
It just is a spider.
It just is. So when Nietzsche comes along and asks it implicitly to spin a better web or a healthier web or a different web,
He's missing the point.
he's fundamentally misunderstanding it. He's essentially asking the spider to stop being a spider and become, well, a philosopher, or at least to make its natural behavior fit a human philosophical goal.
Wow.
And the tension, the core question Kosticki brings out is just so direct. Why do you want the spider to be anything else but a spider? Why impose our ideals, our categories, our whole human philosophical baggage onto this creature that's just being?
Yeah, it's such a powerful challenge, isn't it? Because it throws this immediate critical light on all his other animal metaphors.
It really does.
If he can't let the spider just be a spider, what does that suggest about the limits of even his incredibly radical project? Makes you wonder if this projecting, this humanizing is a pattern.
Exactly. Let's look at another big one.
Okay, yeah, the classic. The birds of prey and the lambs. Probably his most famous animal pairing.
Definitely the most controversial, maybe.
For sure. On the genealogy of morality, this is central to his critique of what he calls slave morality.
Right.
He paints the beast of prey, the eagle, maybe the lion, as acting from this kind of natural, innocent strength. They just are powerful, noble, self-affirming. They take what they need because it's their nature, no malice, just power.
Their assertion of will.
But then the lambs, in their weakness, their vulnerability, they invent this slave morality, and it's born, he says, from resentment.
That key term, that poisonous, festering bitterness towards the strong.
Yeah, this deep-seated ill will. And for Nietzsche, this morality that flips things, making strength evil and weakness good, it's a sickness, a corruption of true aristocratic values.
Okay, but if we take Kostucky's perspective, the spider perspective, and apply it here,
Then what?
then you have to ask, why shouldn't the lamb resent the eagle? I mean, from the lamb's point of view.
It's dinner.
Exactly. So creating a moral code that values things like meekness, community, cooperation, that condemns raw predatory power, that isn't necessarily a sickness, is it? It looks a lot like an ingenious survival strategy. It's using the tools the lamb has, numbers, community, social bonds, to survive in a world where it's constantly under threat. So calling it a sickness is judging the lamb for not being an eagle. It imposes this single predatory standard of strength onto everything.
It ignores the lamb's own reality.
Completely. And Kostucky makes this great point that normal is a moving target. The lamb's normal, its nature, its way of surviving. It's fundamentally different from the eagle's. Nietzsche, in his push to revalue everything, seems to overlook the actual validity of the lamb being a lamb. He sees it as a distortion, not just a different way of being.
It's a really profound shift in perspective because you start asking, was he analyzing the lamb's viewpoint or just imposing his own definition of strength onto its weakness?
Right.
And this tendency, this projecting, it makes you reconsider even his most sort of developmental ideas, like the three metamorphoses.
Ah, yes, the camel, the lion, and the child. The spiritual journey.
That's the one. From Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he lays out this progression. First, the camel, the beautiful spirit, bows down, takes on heavy burdens, tradition, morality, duty, carries the weight.
The thou shalt.
Exactly. Then the camel transforms into the lion, the rebel, says the sacred no to duty, throws off the burdens, tears down the old values, freedom from...
Unnecessary destruction.
And then finally the ultimate goal, the child. Innocent, creative, affirming, playing freely, creating new values, freedom too. And in this picture, the camel's nature, its endurance, it's clearly framed as inferior. Something to get past.
A stage to be overcome, shed like old skin.
Right.
But again, applying that critical lens, why is this progression necessarily superior? He sets up this very clear, linear hierarchy of spiritual growth.
Yeah.
But isn't there a unique power in the camel's ability to bear weight? Isn't there a profound strength in endurance itself, in steadfastness, in carrying on?
You mean it's not just a lesser stage?
Maybe not. Maybe it's a different kind of strength. So by demanding this transformation, by insisting the camel must become a lion and then a child, Nietzsche is imposing his specific path, his ideal of growth.
Which might not be the only way.
Exactly. And it raises this broader question for us, beyond Nietzsche. When we think about growth, self-improvement, is it always about shedding the past, becoming something radically new?
Transcending what we are now.
Or is there also a kind of quiet nobility, maybe even wisdom, in simply being what we are, recognizing the strengths we have, including the ability to carry the weight, the experiences we've accumulated? Maybe accepting the camel in us isn't failure, but just a valid way of existing.
That's a really challenging thought. It makes you look at endurance differently, not just as something to escape.
Right.
And this pattern, the subtle hierarchy, where the animal needs to be kind of more than itself to fit the ideal, it seems to persist even in what Nietzsche himself called his most synthetic and beautiful metaphor.
The eagle and the serpent.
That's the one. You see it with Zarathustra. The eagle represents the highest spirit soaring high. The serpent represents the deepest earthbound instincts, cunning wisdom.
And they're together, right? The serpent coiled around the eagle's neck, flying as companions.
Yeah, it looks like perfect harmony. Integration, spirit and instinct united, elevated, wholeness achieved.
It's a really potent image, no doubt. Very compelling. But applying Kostucky's critique again.
You look closer.
And you notice something subtle, but maybe significant. The serpent, with all its earthy wisdom, its connection to the ground, the primal, it's still being lifted off the ground. Its earthbound wisdom is implicitly validated only when it is raised into the sky by the spirit, by the eagle. Its natural home is the earth, but its value in this Nietzschean picture seems to be fully realized only when it's up there, with the spiritual eagle.
So it's not quite an equal partnership.
It raises the question, doesn't it? Why can't the serpent's cunning and wisdom be sufficient on its own terms? Down on the ground where it belongs, why does it need to be elevated, spiritualized sort of, brought up to the eagle's level to be fully validated,
It's like, again, the animal is being asked to be something a bit more than itself.
to fit a human ideal. This time, an ideal of wholeness, where instinct needs the guidance or elevation of spirit, as if its natural state isn't quite enough for Nietzsche's ultimate vision.
So, stepping back from Nietzsche for a second, is this kind of thing, this way of using animals, a bigger pattern? Is it a common trap in, say, Western philosophy? Defining ourselves against the animal, using them as symbols more than seeing them as beings?
That's a huge question, and yeah, I think many would argue it is. Philosophers like Jacques Derrida, for instance, made a really strong case for this.
Derrida, how did he connect?
Well, he argued that basically the entire Western philosophical tradition tends to define man, capital M, by setting him in opposition to this single, sort of flattened out idea of the animal, capital A.
Like, human is defined by what animal is not.
Precisely. We create this big, undifferentiated category, the animal kingdom, and it serves as a backdrop against which human uniqueness, our rationality, our language, our morality, whatever, can stand out.
Interesting.
And Derrida was pretty radical here. He even coined this term, animate. It's a mix of animal and mot, the French word for word.
Animal, okay.
His point was that the animal isn't really a natural category out there in the world. It's a word, a human linguistic construct.
Yeah.
And by lumping all non-human creatures under this one word, we erase their incredible diversity, their individuality, their own unique ways of experiencing the world.
It makes them easier to manage conceptually.
And easier to use symbolically for our own stories.
Right.
Talk about the animal doing this or that, when really you have spiders, lambs, eagles, serpents, millions of distinct lives.
And the irony here, circling back to Nietzsche.
Is massive, isn't it?
Yeah. Because here's Nietzsche, the great challenger of traditions, the guy trying to overturn everything, revalue all values. And yet, he seems to have fallen into this very trap.
It seems so. He uses animals brilliantly to hold up a mirror to us, to make us question ourselves, push us towards something new.
But then, it's like Kostaki suggests, he seems almost disappointed when they don't reflect his own vision of what humanity should become, when the spider just wants to be a spider, not a better philosopher.
It's a profound irony for someone so focused on authenticity and overcoming limitations.
Yeah.
And it really brings us back to that core idea.
Yeah.
We humans often act like kings of context.
Mhm.
We put ourselves right at the center. We look at the animal kingdom and we use it to tell stories. Stories about our own power, our own psychology, our own potential for greatness, or sometimes our own failures.
We demand something from them.
We look at these creatures and we demand they tell us something profound about ourselves. We rarely just let them be. Let them exist on their own terms without immediately translating them into a human lesson or symbol.
And maybe that is the real takeaway here, the core insight from looking at Nietzsche's zoo through this critical lens,
Seems like it.
that perhaps the most profound lesson the animals around us can teach us is one we often, well, resist hearing. It challenges our whole human-centered view.
Which is?
That they are not here for us. They aren't just symbols waiting for us to decode them. They're not characters in the grand narrative of human self-discovery. They aren't stepping stones for us to become some higher man.
They're D's living.
They are simply living their own lives by their own natures. The spider spins, the lamb fears, the serpent crawls. They have this radical self-sufficiency, this way of being that's completely independent of what we think about it.
And so maybe the greatest philosophical challenge isn't figuring out how to translate their existence into our terms, how to fit them into our metaphors or make them serve our ideals.
What is it then?
Maybe it's simply to find the humility to let them be entirely and unapologetically themselves, to see their value as intrinsic, inherent in their own way of existing without needing it to mean something for us.
That's a powerful thought to end on. Finding the humility to just let them be. Take that thought with you as you observe the world around you this week.